the section we'll be reading, starting on page 40, is "The National Assembly Means the Council's Death" by Ernst Dalmig. And a speech given by Dalmig at the First General Congress of Workers' and Soldiers' Councils in Germany in Berlin on December 19, 1918. Comrades, soldiers, mein Herren, we are the power. We hammer life into the state, this old rotten thing. We are of God's wrath, until now, the proletariat. With these words, the people's delegate, Dittman, closed his speech yesterday. Today, I wanted to open mine with him, because what this revolutionary prophet expressed 70 years ago, namely that the proletariat was chosen to destroy the old order and to build a new one, has now become our task and our duty. In his time, the world was not ready yet. Of course, this quote unquote rotten thing, the state, will not be destroyed by well tempered parliamentarians such as Mr. Landsberg and the People's Delegate Didman. It will not be destroyed by clever party secretaries whose schemes characterize even this Congress, as we have seen over the last few days. It will not be destroyed by obedient union employees who hide behind membership lists and accounting books and who are interested in but one kind of movement, that of wages. The new world can only be built by the political, economic, and cultural activities of the entire German people, the entire German proletariat. German workers, whether they work with their hands or with their heads, must get involved and understand that a new world can only emerge from a sea of blood and tears. This Congress is the very first revolutionary parliament of Germany. This is where I put my hope. For the first time since April 1948, the voice of the people can truly be heard. Of course, it is not 1848, and there's something unique about the first phase of the German Revolution and its revolutionary parliament. The euphoria of the first revolutionary days passed quickly. The hesitation, the backwardness, the attachment to the old ideologies is still very strong. That is why it is important to push the revolution forward, not only for economic, but also for cultural reasons. It is mandatory to make it a true people's movement that includes the bottom of society. This seems clear, but is not clear enough for everyone to understand. Mein Herren, not a single revolutionary parliament in history has had such a sober, doughty, let me say Philistine spirit as the one assembled here. Where is the grand transformation of the people's souls, or of their ideas, that characterized the National Convent in France? Where is the youthful passion of March 1848? Where is the anthem emerging from the German people's passion for liberty? We can feel nothing of it. It is very telling that the colors and insignias of the old regime still adorn the government buildings. Above them flutters a pitiful red ribbon. This is what the revolution looks like. Yes, I am talking about exterior things, but they express the situation we are in. However, in one aspect, this revolutionary parliament resembles all revolutionary parliaments, in the blindness and self delusion about how far one has come. One refuses to accept the iron laws of history that determine the course of revolutions. Some of you might have laughed and joked when our workers and soldiers arrived at the Congress, but theirs are the voices from the bottom of society, and I can tell you, don't expect these voices to fall silent. They will become louder and clearer. When the history of the revolutionary weeks in Germany will be written, people will ask themselves, were those folk really too blind to see how they put a rope around their own necks? After all, it should be obvious to anyone able to think clearly that the wonderful decision to elect a National Assembly means nothing but the death sentence for the current system, that is, the council system. If you have the desire to form a political suicide club, I leave you to it. Me, I want no part of it. Comrades, soldiers, I assume I will not offend anyone in this room if I state that only very few of us have ever really pondered the council system. How did you become members of the Workers' and Soldiers' Councils? Basically, you were carried by a colossal event, but you did not necessarily grasp the deep meaning of these institutions. Where did the council idea come from? It emerged in 1905 when the Russian proletariat led its first historic fight against the dreadful Tsarist regime. Spontaneously, without much preparation at all, workers' councils arose from the nucleus of the New World, the big factory. In 1905, these councils led the struggle. In 1906 to 1907, the council members who had to pay for their heroic courage, either in the drumhead courts martial or in the Siberian ice. The idea of the council system, however, remained alive. It reemerged like a flame in March 1917 when the Great Russian Revolution started. We are familiar with this history. But how could the council system play such a pivotal role during the events of November 1918 in Germany? The answer is this: because the council system is, and has to be, the organizational structure of modern revolutions. Of course, I know, and this concerns especially the comrades in uniform, that the system smells of bolshevism. But neither I nor anyone with a clear vision will be detracted by this. Any revolution will be vilified. This ends Cullets, the patriots, the demagogues, the communards of 1971. They were all vilified, defamed, and attacked. In other words, we simply have to accept being called Bolsheviks. However, comrades, this is no big deal. What is not Bolshevism today? Some people, every one of you, as you sit here, is a quote-unquote Bolshevik. The Bolshevik boogeyman is so deeply entrenched in the so-called soldiers' councils that I have to tell you a short anecdote about this. I believe back there, the communards of 1971. Is that a typo? Because that speech was given in like 1918 or 1919, I think. Yeah, 1918. Anyway, when we realized that many soldiers returning from the front as a result of poor and biased information expect murder, manslaughter, and a gang of depraved revolutionaries in Berlin, we saw it as our duty in the Executive Council to enlighten them. We produced a leaflet with Kameraden as the headline. Among others, all of the SPD comrades and all of the soldiers in the Executive Council approved the text. Couriers brought huge numbers of the leaflet to the troops, both in the East and the West. When it arrived in Vilnius at the Soldiers' Council of the 10th Army, the council members told our courier that they would never distribute such a Bolshevik rant among their soldiers. They simply destroyed the entire delivery. This kind of reaction is very characteristic. It is not enough for officers who are voted into soldiers' councils to have the trust of their soldiers, especially in the times of revolution. Their conviction matters. How did the workers emerge in Germany? They emerged from the big strike movements of the last years, in which we, who have always been strong opponents of the war and who have lived with tortured souls for 4 years given the pressure and the lies the German people were exposed to, were the driving force. We convinced the people in the big factories who shared our ideas to act as workers' council. They did so under enormous danger. During the last weeks before the revolution, we engaged in dedicated and very dangerous agitation in the Berlin barracks. We managed to find a number of soldiers who were willing to join us in our plans to overthrow the blood-stained regime. We formed, of course, illegally, a provisional workers and soldiers council. Every declaration and leaflet distributed by us in the barracks demanding the soldiers not to shoot at their brothers and mothers were signed by it. What were the consequences? Not only did the political police chase us, not only did the high command in Berlin-Brandenburg, the reactionary institution of 1848, mobilize all of its forces against us. No, we were attacked, cursed, and defamed by comrades from our own class. On November 6th, the SPD released a response to our leaflet. Quote, "Beware of divisions of war among proletarian brothers, of irresponsible elements trying to instigate careless attacks that are not in your interest. Do not follow the slogans of small groups and unknown manipulators. If the workers stray in all directions, or even cross each other's way, then only misery can come from it, never joy." Unquote. This gives you a quick impression of how the SPD saw the workers and soldiers' councils. Then November 9 came, and thanks to our preparatory work in the shops and factories, the old world was wiped out. Suddenly, SPD members arrived in drones, fervently trying to join the council system. This is further proof that in revolutionary times, especially today when the proletariat necessarily carries the revolution as the only revolutionary class, the council system imposes itself naturally. It would be sheer foolishness if one wanted to resist this historical necessity. It's simple. The old bourgeois democracy, with its ballots and its petty parliaments, will not exist forever. It exists under specific historical circumstances. Today, with socialism emerging as the new foundation of the world, democracy will inevitably be replaced by proletarian democracy and expressed in the council system. Comrades and soldiers, many of you applauded enthusiastically when Comrade Cohen argued for the National Assembly and even suggested to hold elections earlier than planned. By doing so, you have issued your own death sentence. The declarations made by Comrade Cohen and by others, namely that the council system will remain even when the National Assembly gathers, are hollow words. What role can a council system play next to a pompous parliamentarian, democratic, bourgeois system represented by a national assembly? The councils will be mere staffage, puppets. In the economic sphere, the old trade unions will soon, with the help of the National Assembly and the bourgeoisie, push the workers' councils out of the shops and factories. They are already doing it. No, these two things do not go together. You have to choose one or the other. I warn you, though, if you choose the old system, you can bury all your dreams about a new, free, also culturally and spiritually free Germany, about a Germany shedding the old spirit of subservience that still haunts it. A Germany whose affairs are really determined by active people doing more than running to the ballot box every 2 or 3 years. It is not surprising that local election results reported from around the country usually see the socialists taking 3/5 of the vote and the bourgeois parties too. This proves that the ideology of the bourgeoisie, especially its economic system, still has strong roots in this country. All announcements of a strong socialist majority in a coming National Assembly must be regarded with skepticism. Someone who wholeheartedly defends the National Assembly and who is a great enemy of the council system, Herr von Gerlach of the World of Monday, sees things very realistically. He says the following about the hailed National Assembly. I fear we will see many all too familiar faces in it, people we already know from the Reichstag. It will be an attempt to make new politics with old people, and we will learn that the revolution does not mean evolution for more than some people. I dare predict that it will take but 4 weeks before the National Assembly will be strongly criticized once it is forced to accept a tough peace treaty, including reparations for the atrocities committed by the old regime. That is, once the National Assembly is forced to take significantly from the upper classes without being able to give sufficiently to the lower, it will be viciously attacked from both the right and the left. This is what will happen because it has to happen. These are not the words of a Bolshevik, but of a law-abiding bourgeois Democrat, an ardent believer in bourgeois democracy and the National Assembly. If he reaches such a verdict, then I say, if the old Germany shall disappear and a new one emerge from its tomb, we need to fill the German people with an entirely new political and cultural spirit. I stress the term cultural. I mean by it everything that can be summarized under the notion of a, quote, higher development of humankind, unquote. Material goods and political freedoms are not the only things that matter. We also need to think about the new culture that must emerge from the fire that rages globally. This is what we must consider right here at this hour. We must not only think about Germany and its narrow borders, which we do not even know today, we must look at all other countries bleeding like us from thousands of wounds. Their salvation can only come from the strongest force there is, the masses of the people, from national unity. We know that we cannot expect salvation from the likes of Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and all the others. However, I do not share the pessimism of Comrade Cohen. Things are on the move in other countries too. Comrade Cohen should know, for example, that the English trade unions have not had control over the strikes of the ammunition workers for 3 years. These strikes are administered solely by Workers' Council. This is a remarkable sign of the time. In France, the councils are also getting stronger by the day. Chauvinism is forced to its knees in other countries as much as it is in Germany. The burden of the war is not only felt by the German proletariat, but also by the French, English, and American, and it causes the same bitterness there. If someone says today that it would be foolish to expect a revolution in those countries because we do not have strong enough indications, I want to remind you that our glorious SPD comrades still spoke of, quote, a few conspirators, unquote, on November 7th. They could not believe that a revolution was possible in Germany. I had to fight my own friends because they deemed it impossible. And then the revolution came. This is happening in other countries. It cannot be any other way if we consider the laws of history. A world war has to lead to a world revolution, even if the revolution might come earlier in some places than others. People are also suffering in the Negro villages along the Senegal River and in the farms of Australia and India. The consequences of the World War are felt around the entire globe. At this historical moment during the First Great Revolution in Germany, we have to embrace a new political system, namely the council system. All else would be foolish. it would mean to stubbornly cling to old traditions. However, I am afraid that this Congress will not make the right decisions. The Ludeman motion indicates the imminent self-castration of the Congress and hence the revolution. If this were a revolutionary parliament with temperament and fire, it would constitute itself as, quote, the National Assembly, unquote, and state clearly, we are this body, we have the masses behind us, we have the power of the soldiers and workers behind us, we want to determine the future of Germany. It is wrong to think that this would make a peace agreement more difficult. The Entente would not mind such a move. We don't even know what the Entente thinks about our workers and soldiers' councils. We receive the most contradictory news. And if today's news seem negative, let me state this. Wherever Mr. Erzberger is involved, I am very skeptical. If the Council of People's Delegates has not yet removed Mr. Solf and all the other remaining employees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who engage in secret diplomacy, we have to assume that they are using the same old poisonous channels they used during the war, and that they maintain the same connections reaching from Berlin's Wilhelmstrasse to Bern, Christiania, etc. It's very telling that it had been impossible so far to release any of the secret documents kept in the Foreign Ministry, the government staff, the Ministry of War, many other places. We are already in the 7th week of the revolution. Imagine the contribution we could make to a satisfying peace treaty if we were able to say, look, we, the people, are innocent. We have been lied to, we have been betrayed, and we can prove it. This is not happening, however. Old diplomacy still reigns, and no efforts are made to change this. It would have been the duty of the first Revolutionary Congress to demand action. Instead, most of you only follow old paths. Quatum mover has to be avoided under all circumstances. We want to prevent anything new, anything that we don't know yet, by all means. History will pass a harsh verdict on this Congress. The council system is often called a dictatorship, and every bourgeois gets tremendously scared. He thinks of Browning's machine guns and other things. Please look at the history of the last few years. We have lived under the most shameful and ruthless dictatorship that the world has ever known. The brutality of the Tsarist regime was at least appeased by corruption. The resentfulness of the Germans, who had to endure the last 4 years of military dictatorship, as well as a spiritual dictatorship established on August 4th, 1914, will never disappear. I'm talking about the men and women who did not join the warmongers' camp and who kept their humanity on August 1st, 1914. The war was never our business. Yet there are people in our midst who want to stick to the policies of August 4, even during the events of November. If we consider this, the revolution takes on a different face. We, the truly dedicated revolutionaries, remain skeptical and cautious with regard to these people's actions. The council system can have the character of a dictatorship, but the events we have seen in Russia, determined by the laws of history, do not have to repeat themselves in Germany. I'm not among those who advocate a mere imitation of the Russian example. I am German, and I am proud to be German. During the 20 years I have been involved in party politics, I have tried to make German culture, German poetry, and German literature accessible to the masses. These treasures have been kept from them by the bourgeoisie. At the same time, we must apply the useful aspects of the Great Russian Revolution. I have always supported the Bolsheviks, and I still do. Opinions on the Bolsheviks might differ, but their courage and their dedication to socialism are genuine. They were the first who took the step from talking about peace to realizing it. I know why the bourgeoisie and the bourgeois socialists portray the Bolsheviks as devils. They are afraid. It is understandable that the bourgeois bemoans the loss of so much they cherish, of all the comfort it has taken for granted. But, and I direct this question to the soldiers assembled here, has the bourgeoisie ever cared about you facing grenades for 4 years, about you crawling through the snow of Poland and Russia, about you receiving the injuries you are still carrying with you? No, it didn't. They fed you with nationalist phrases and promised you gratitude of the fatherland. Most importantly, though, they protected the property of the rulers and made sure that their houses were warm. So now that German people have finally freed themselves of their chains and taken initiative, are we really to worry about a quote-unquote dictatorship? What does the term dictatorship in Germany really mean? I'm holding the economic statistics of 1907 in my hands. The most recent ones we have, the numbers show that proletarians compose the majority in all areas of work: agriculture, forestry, mining, construction, industrial production, trade, and transport. This implies that they were ruled by an economically privileged minority. And now you want a National Assembly to continue this pattern? You may shake your head at my words as much as you want. The National Assembly will gather now. It will neither have the will nor the energy to realize socialism. Yes, it will create institutions that can provide the necessary financial means for such a task. State monopolies and other state capitalist measures and institutions are conceivable, but an economic system determined by the people and giving equal rights to producers and consumers will not be considered. To establish such a system, one needs to radically change the structure of property and the relevant laws. This requires the rule of the councils. Needless to say, the current council system is incomplete and still incoherent. During the first revolutionary wave, there was no organizational plan, no organizational structure. But things can be improved and the council system can be established properly, making a unified electoral system for all of Germany possible. First and foremost, this concerns the workers and the soldiers who will increasingly enter the workforce and, where relevant, the peasants. On this basis, we can even elect a National Assembly, but then it will be a National Assembly that will truly unite the country, something a National Assembly based on a bourgeois class system never will. The treacherous separatist movement that we are witnessing today are not carried by the workers. They are instigated by capitalists and clerics in the Rhine Valley and elsewhere. Proletarian solidarity and the council system are the best sealant for a united country. A change from today's political system to a proletarian democracy will also change the relations to our Polish neighbors. Maybe comrades from the Polish territories will speak at this Congress, testifying that the Katas politics are responsible for debates on separation and annexation in Poland. Proletarian politics are based on the council system, with a National Assembly born by the system provide far more guarantees for peace and friendship between Germany and its neighbors than the current system. Let me return to the so-called dictatorship. Yes, the rule of the councils will be misfortunate for those who have, for decades, and especially during the war, derived great riches from the blood and sweat of the people. They will not like to hear that they have indulged enough, and now it is the turn of the formerly oppressed and exploited to enjoy life. But this is the inevitable verdict of history. It cannot be undone by bourgeois whining about the injustice of a dictatorship. There are other things that have to be considered regarding Germany's future. I've already said that the spirit of submissiveness sits deep in the Germans' bone, even in revolutionary times. People demand a leader. It is unbelievable how little trust Germans have in themselves. Even the self-confidence of the soldiers who, from a purely militaristic standpoint, have achieved tremendous things. The West, in the East, in the Balkans, everywhere, is extremely low. Look at the Great English Revolution. It created its own parliamentary army with carters, merchants, assistants, and horse drivers, turning into colonels and brigadiers. Cromwell and his Ironsides trashed the Cavaliers, the reactionary forces at the time. Yes, this happened 200 years ago, but the world should have advanced. It should be even easier today. The Great French Revolution saw Livy en masse after a revolutionary call went out to the people. The bricklayer Kleber and other took the lead in this revolutionary movement, making use of all military means available. The War of Secession in America, a similar revolutionary period, also created its own organization. Yet the German soldiers, albeit schooled in military affairs, demand their officers to stay, even refusing to return home otherwise. I believe that if the soldiers had a better understanding of the council system and if they had chosen the right leaders, their return would happen more smoothly and orderly than it does now under the officers they have. The German Revolution has very little trust in itself, and the spirit of submissiveness and obedience is a deeply rooted legacy reaching back many decades. This cannot be changed by simple election campaigns with leaflets thrown at the masses every 2 or 3 years. It can only be changed by a dedicated attempt to make and keep the German people politically active. This can only happen in the council system. We have to abandon the entire old administrative machinery on the federal, regional, and municipal level. The German people have to get used to self-management instead of governance. But how do you educate a people? How do you let them fully grasp the concept of self-management? If you allow them to simply trot along and send delegates to parliament, men who only hold fine speeches and engage in party politics without changing anything for the masses. Let us also address the issue of socialization. How can you truly socialize anything if the workers are not directly involved? Of course, in difficult times like these, one cannot just experiment wildly. We know that socialization can only happen according to a proper and commonly accepted plan. It can only be successful, effective, and thorough if we have peace, if we know our borders, if we know which economic means we will have, and if we know which international trade relations we can maintain. But if the workers are not involved, if they are kept dormant and separated from economic affairs, then socialization can either never be realized or it will only turn into state capitalism, to monopolization against the will of the workers. What we need is the implementation of the council system in the workplace. We need workers to be in charge of their shops and factories through the councils they trust. This has to happen now. The shops and factory owners will grab as much as they can before socialization comes. It is mandatory for the workers to know and understand the entire production process, not just the specific work they are doing. Once again, this is only possible in the council system. Of course, the electoral formalities of the council system have to be discussed, but I will not do this now. They are technical questions that will be solved soon and easily enough. Don't be disheartened by the mistakes and errors that have been made during the revolution's first weeks. Workers' councils have popped up everywhere. There has been little communication, and therefore tensions and misunderstandings are inevitable. But these are teething troubles that can be overcome, or let me say, they must be overcome. This is only possible if we are committed to the council system. In this case, many of the complaints that we have heard will soon quiet down. Right now, all we have is a compromise between the revolution and the old system. Such a compromise cannot lead to anything. The old state machinery is still in place, and all public servants have kept their jobs. The Executive Council in Berlin has only had a monitoring mandate, not a legislative one. It is the name for the workers and soldiers' councils across the country. Nationally, such a dual system leads to conflict. It is also more expensive than a unified system. Yesterday, by passing the Ludemann motion, you have essentially declared that a dictatorship of millions of workers is a bad thing for Germany, while the dictatorship of 6 men is good. Once again, this proves the German ideology of submissiveness. We need the workers' councils to really take on administrative responsibility. Then, everything giving reason to complain now will be history. This also goes for the above mentioned cultural education. It can only take on life in the council system, which involves all classes and allows everyone to be interested and active. We must not deceive ourselves. The moral harm caused by the war can still be felt everywhere. There's no point in denying that it is a problem in the ranks of the workers. The workers need to understand how important an intensive period of production is right now for the common good. This is the only way to overcome the corrupting effects of the war bond, etc. But how can the workers understand this if they are handed a ballot every 2 years? How shall they develop an interest in the state? A state that, in order to be socialist, has to unite politics and economics. This can only be done on the grounds of the council system. I know that what I am saying is not popular in the circle. Nothing new is ever popular in the beginning. But I am not worried. Even if you reject the council system, it will come anyway. You may send the smartest parliament to the National Assembly and draw up the finest constitution, but you cannot stop the developments on the ground. Do not think that the German Revolution was limited to a few days in November. It will continue. Maybe Germany will experience the same as Russia. Our Russian friends say that the February Revolution was the beautiful revolution and the October Revolution the ugly one. Yet it was the October Revolution that really brought social change. So don't be surprised if the German Revolution returns in the near future with waving hair and strong steps, asking, "Why did you throw away the chance I gave you in November?" I cannot say when this will happen, but everyone who knows just a little about world history knows that it will happen. So, vote against us, celebrate the National Assembly, ask for elections already on January 19th, do whatever you want, but you cannot stop destiny. There are mass graves in the East and in the West. Those who have died believe that they gave their lives for a better Germany. They were misled, and it is our duty to turn their belief into reality. Not far from here, in Friedrichshain, not only the rebels of 1848 are buried, but also those of November 1918. They include my young friend Erich Habersath. I consider it a duty to mention his name here. He represents the working youth of Germany who have served the revolution courageously. Yes, he was one of the often vilified youth of Berlin. Erich Habersath sat at my feet when I lectured and distributed leaflets with passion and determination. In the morning of November 9, He stormed out of the barracks with the bravery of the youth. A bullet pierced his heart. Coming from the mass grave of Friedrichshain, I hear a voice, and you shall hear it too, reciting more words of Freiligrath. Quote, be prepared, be ready, free the earth in which we lie firm and stiff. Let us not be haunted by the memory that we were free before we became slaves again, destined to remain that way.